All right, so we saw how we could do meta learning using evolution as inspiration, but there's an alternate model we can also discuss, which relates to learning during the lifetime. Right? Like so, each task in the Harlow experiment represents a covariate shift. Going back to the distinctions we introduced in the first tutorial, the model sees inputs it has never seen before. So the Baldwin effect exercise shows us that with evolutionary algorithms, we can build powerful individuals which can quickly adapt to these new inputs and then select the best input. But now we want to think about individual lifetime learning. So you don't necessarily need evolution for this to happen. You are able to learn the structure of the Haller tasks without any evolution. So this should be possible within the lifetime of an agent, this form of meta learning. So how would that happen? So this has been studied. The idea is that there are some neuroanatomical structures and they have particular functions and they coordinate with each other in a way that you can do this kind of meta learning within an individual's lifetime. So the relevant paper here is Wang et al. 2018. You can find the link in the tutorial. So they talk about two systems. First is the dopaminergic system in the brain, which is implicated in reinforcement learning. And then there's the prefrontal cortex and the other connected brain areas, which play a role in working memory, rule following, and action selection. So these are important working memory and the other factors to integrate information across time. So if you're in a task, you can have some sort of memory during that task. And so you don't necessarily need to do your actions just based on the current state, but you actually have a trace of the previous states and also the rewards you got. And you could infer already, given your past, like what kind of action should I take. It's not just conditional on the state, but it's conditional on what happened in the past. So that makes your learning even more efficient, right? So the prefrontal cortex connects to subcortical regions such as the basal ganglia and thalamus. This, along with like connections within the prefrontal cortex, because it also has connections within itself, this constitutes a recurrent neural network. And this recurrent neural network has been implicated in a variety of actions, where it could be related to motor control, it could be related to like emotional valence control. Like there's a lot of control systems that the brain has, and wherever you need to learn new associations and like, dictate control based on that, this system is always implicated in it. And then, of course, there's the other system, the dopaminergic system. So you have multiple pathways in this system. So, for example, you have this dopaminergic system, which includes the amygdala and these neurons, which can basically emit dopamine. And this dopamine is then emitted into different parts of the brain, which facilitates learning in those parts, right? So, from the standpoint of RL, dopamine has been shown to encode errors in reward prediction. So that's very useful in learning, right? Because if you remember in RL, you make an estimation of your predicted, like estimated rewards, but then the environment actually gives you reward, and then you have to compute the difference between them, right? That difference dictates how you learn. And so this difference is apparently communicated via dopamine in the brain. So what Wang et al. Did is they caricatured these two systems. So they use an RNN, a recurrent neural network, which in this case is a long short-term memory network, which is more stable than traditional recurrent neural networks to represent the prefrontal cortex. And then this network, this recurrent neural network, is trained via reinforcement learning, which represents the influence of the dopaminergic system, right? So this RNN will take inputs, which are the two objects, let's say, and then say, should I say the left object or the right object? But it's not just the objects, it will also get information about its previous states, previous objects it saw, previous actions it did, and the previous rewards it got. All of that. And then, of course, it also gets access to this reward prediction error, which is then used via RL to update the weights. So in course of training, the RNN sees multiple different tasks, which is sets of novel objects. And in order to obtain high reward, it cannot just memorize which specific objects provided reward in the past, right? Because it has to learn new state reward pairs. Instead, what it can use is that there is some overall task structure, right? There's always two objects, and one of them is rewarded, the other is not. And in this particular setting, if one object occurs with another object, then it does not occur with any other object. Like there are these structures that the RNN could use to speed up its inference on like what object is the rewarded object. So it can quickly identify the rewarded object, rewarded item. And so this internal state will be like, well, why do we need this RNN when we could do this task based on these feed forward models that we have been using. But the idea is that this allows you to show learning signatures even when the RL, the reinforcement learning signal, or this dopaminergic signal, we talk about this temporal difference signal that was used to train these network weights with RL, that is turned off, right? So the model continues to learn even after training is over. And how does this happen? Well, the recurrent network has internal states which hold activity patterns over time. So, what happened in the past dictates what you will do now. And these states can help you remember which objects provided reward after the first guess. Let's say you see two objects and then you make a guess, and then it said you do not get a reward. Then you see like the same objects in different trial, and you make a guess, and you're like, well, okay, you still don't get a reward. Then you make a guess, and you get a reward, right? And so the RNN, when its internal states, can already be like, okay, given these state reward associations, I can already figure out like this object is the more likely object to give me a reward. And so internally, it can figure out its, let's say, the value. It is simulating reinforcement learning within its activations instead of having this like temporal difference signal based on the reward prediction error train the system. That's what we do in training, definitely. That's the meta part. But the system itself acquires this ability to simulate this reinforcement learning procedure. And so this helps the network continue to select that object and like have a high performance. So there's no coding exercises associated with this part, but if you like to know more about this, do check out the resources provided in the tutorial. Instead, now we will move to another biologically inspired solution, which is easier to implement to the continual learning problem. A bit of a different class, but that would complete the introduction to this part of the field for you.